Good morning. Today's lesson is 5.7. We are going to be writing zeros in the dividend. So our essential question today, when do you write a zero in the dividend to find a quotient? Let's connect. When decimals are divided, the dividend may not have enough digits for you to complete the division. We don't do remainders when we have our decimals. So in these cases, you can write a zero to the right of the last digit until you can solve the problem all the way out. So let's unlock the problem. The equivalent fraction shows that writing zeros to the right of the decimal does not change the value. So 90.8 is the same thing as 90 times 8 over 10 times 10, which is 90 times 80 over 100, which is 90 times 80 hundredths. That zero does not change the value at all. So during a fundraising event, Adrian rode his bicycle 45 8/10 mile in 4 hours. Find his speed in miles per hour by dividing the distance by the time. All right, so let's divide. We're going to divide 45 8/10 divided by 4. So let's estimate it. Well, 45 divided by 4, well, we could say 45 is close to 44, right? And then divided by 4, we know that's going to be 11. So our answer should be somewhere around 11. So let's write the decimal point in the quotient above, the decimal point in the dividend. So here I am right here, right? So my decimal point's there, so it's going to go right above. Okay, my decimal is going to go right there, right above. So now I have 4, and 4 can go into 4, and it goes in one time. You really need to make sure that you're lining it up underneath the 4. 4 times 1 is 4. Okay, and I'm going to subtract that, and I'm going to get a 0. Now I'm going to bring down my 5. I'm going to bring down my 5. Okay, make sure you keep everything lined up. Now 4 goes into 5, again, one time. So now I'm going to write it above the 5 there. And 4 times 1 is 4. I'm going to subtract, and I get 1 left over. Now I'm going to bring down my 8. Okay, and 4 goes into 18. It goes in 4 times, right? 4 times 4 is 16. I'm going to subtract, I'm going to get a 2. Now, when we were doing the problems before, we would say, oh, we have remainder 2. But you don't have to do that. You could try and see if you can work the problem all the way out. So in order to do that, remember they said you add a 0 at the end of your number because it doesn't change the value of your number. And then you're going to bring that 0 down. Can 4 go into 20? Well, it can. It goes in 5 times. And it goes in equally. 5 times 4 is 20. I subtract to get nothing left. So my answer is going to be 11 45 hundredths, okay? And as I'm looking over here, they kind of were doing it. I did it all on the first one. So let's go ahead and we'll do the problem again. 4 goes into 4 4 times. Or it goes in 1 time. 1 times 4 is 4. I subtract, I get 0. Okay? And then I bring down my 5. 4 goes into 5 1 time. 4 times 1 is 4, so then I subtract, I get 1. I bring down my 8, and 4 goes into 8. Oh, put my decimal there. 4 times, and that was 16. 4 times 4 is 16, and I subtracted, and I got 2. So then over here, they rewrote that all for you. So 1.4. Okay, and this time, and then we had the 2 right here. I brought down my 0 right here. See how I brought down my 0? And then this goes in 4 times 5 is 20 with a remainder of 0. So I just kind of did it all for you here. They wanted you to break it out in step 2 and step 3. So let's connect again. When you divide a whole numbers, you can show the amount that is left over by writing the remainder or the fraction. By writing a 0 in the dividend, you can also show that amount as a decimal. Okay, so example, let's write zeros in the dividend. We have 372 divided by 15. So we're going to divide until we have an amount that's less than a divisor left over. Then we're going to insert a decimal point and a 0 to the end of the dividend. Then we're going to place the decimal point quotient above the decimal point in the dividend, and we're going to continue dividing. So we're going to do it right now. So they've already started it. 15 can't go into 3, but it can go into 37. It goes in 2 times. 2 times 15 is 30. I have 37 minus 30, and I get 7. I brought down my 2. 15 times 4 was 60. When I subtract that, I get 12. Well, 12 is less than 15, but if I add a 0 and I bring that 0 down, I can continue going on. And 15 happens to go in, and I put my decimal above when I do that. When I add a 0, I put a decimal, and I put my 0. 15 happens to go into 128 times. 8 times 15 is exactly 120, and I get nothing left over. So 372 divided by 15 is 24 and 8/10. Okay, and that's just doing it with a regular problem. So Sarah has 78 ounces of rice, and she puts an equal amount of rice in each of the 12 bags. What is the amount of rice that she puts in each bag? Explain how you would write the answer using a decimal. Well, what I would do is it's going to be 6.5 ounces. And the reason I know that is because I would take the 12 and I would divide it into the 78. So 12 can't go into 1, but it can go into 78 about 6 times. And 12 times 6, that's going to give me 12. 6, that's 7, is going to give me 72. I'm going to subtract, I'm going to get 6 left over. If I put a decimal point right here and I put a 0, 12 does go into 60 exactly 5 times. 5 times 12 is 60 with nothing left over. So I'm going to do, the amount left over is 6, so I would write a decimal point. I added my 0, okay? Actually, I didn't add my 0, but let me add my 0, and I brought it down. And then I would divide 60 by 12, and I would get 5. So the answer is going to be 6.5 ounces. All right, so let's try this. We're going to now divide. We're going to write the 0 at the end of the dividend as needed. So remember that on this particular problem, I have a decimal in here, and I have to move it over. Because remember, whenever, I'm actually going to rewrite it because I don't like the way they did it. So it was 0.06 divided by 1.23. So I have to remember I have to move this one over twice. If I move that one over twice, this one has to be moved over twice. So my decimal is going to go after my 3 now, and this is simply going to be a 6. So 6 can't go into 1, but it can go into 2, and it goes, or into 12, and it goes in 2 times. 6 times 2 is 12. I subtract, I get nothing left over, bring down my 3. 6 can't go into 3, so I'm going to add a 0, right? Got to put my 0 there because 6 can't go into 3. Now I'm going to add a 0 here, and I'm going to bring it down. 6 can go into 30, and it goes in 5 times. 5 times 6 is 30. So I get nothing left over, so my answer is 20.5. Some people get tricked, and they forget to put this 0 here, and it's a really important 0 because 2 and 5/10 is very different than 20 and 5/10, right? So let's do the next one. So actually, they did it over here, so I'm going to put my 5, my 30, and my 0. There we go. So on this one, again, I kind of want to rewrite it so you guys remember how to do this. 0.8 going into 10. Well, on the outside, I have to move this over. So if I move this over, remember there's an imaginary point here. I'm going to move it over 1, and I'm going to put my decimal right there. So now my decimal is going to go right there. So 8 can't go into 1, but it can go into 10, and it goes into 10 one time. 8 times 1 is 8. I subtract, I get 2 left over. I bring down my 0. 8 goes into 20. Well, it goes into 20 2 times. 8 times 2 is 16. I subtract. I can't take 0 from 6, so I make that be a 10, and I get 4. So now I'm going to add another 0 and keep going. I'm going to bring it down because I want to make sure that I get it all the way divided. 8 goes into 45 times, and it goes in equally, so I get nothing left over. So the answer is 12.5, so 12 and 5/10. So this next part, they've already answered the question for you, right? So we just have to kind of figure out where the decimal is going to go. So that's kind of the tricky part. So it's pretty easy, though, because we have 5 divided by, we have 5. 5 divided by 0.8, right? So I'm going to have to move my decimal over 1, which means I'm going to move my decimal over 1 here, right? Put my 0, and I'm going to have a decimal right there. So my answer is going to be 6.25. I must have had to have added 2 zeros in order to make that one happen. So on this one, we have 435 is the answer, right? And if you notice, I have a decimal right there, so it's going to be 6, and it went into 6.1. So this was 4.35. Add my 0 there. Okay, so all we have to do is figure out where that decimal goes, okay? So you're going to have to look at the decimal. You don't have to necessarily divide it out, although you might, to try and figure out where the decimal is going to go in that 12. Where's the decimal going to go in that 16? Okay? That's what they want you to do on that top part, okay? On the next one, they want you to actually divide. So 4 can't go into 3, but can go into 32. 4 goes into 32, goes in 8 times, right? 8 times 4 is 32. I subtract, I get nothing left over. I bring down my 6. Oh, I gotta make sure I put my decimal right where it's supposed to be. There's no decimals on the outside, so I don't need to move my decimal. I just get to keep it right where it is. So I bring down my 6. 4 goes into 6 one time, right? 1 times 4 is 4. I subtract, I get a 2, but I can't do remainders. So I'm going to add a 0, right? And then I'm going to bring down my 0, and 4 goes into 25 times, and it goes in evenly. So my answer is going to be 8 and 15/100ths. We're going to do the same thing here, only this one, I notice I have a decimal point on the outside, so I need to make sure I move it over, right? So if I move that decimal point over, I need to move this one over. So the 90 is going to be there, and my decimal point is going to be right after it. So 12 goes into 90. Let's see. Let's try 12 times 8 and see. Well, we get 1696. Too much. So it's going to be 7. So I'm going to put my 7 right there. So 12 times 7 is 14. 7, that's 84. I subtract, and I get 6, so I'm going to have to add a 0 and bring it down. And I know 12 goes into 65 times. I just did it on a problem before, right? And it goes in exactly. So the answer is going to be 7 and 5/10. You can do the rest of them on your own. If you need me, I'll be on the floor, and you can also work with a partner. Good luck.